Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. This event is one of the very last events for the adult summer reading program. So if you haven't already done so, OCLS cardholders can participate in the program and enter to win prizes by creating an account at ocls.beanstack.org. I wanted to get that link up for you. Sorry, one second. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. So ocls.beanstack.org. So that's where you can register for summer reading program stuff. And tonight we have some contributors to the book Braves Win, Braves Win, Braves Win, the 1995 World Champion Atlanta Braves. It presents biographies of each of the 40 players who took the field in a Braves uniform in 1995. It also features exciting stories of the 10 most notable games of the 1995 season, as well as behind-the-scenes stories of many of the Braves' front office personnel who worked tirelessly to mold a championship organization. 56 members of the Society for American Baseball Research contributed to this book, and we have 4 of them with us tonight. Now, first, I am going to bring on Peter Gordon. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for having us. Really appreciate this.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Peter is going to be our host for the evening, so I'll start off by introducing him. Peter is the author of Let's Play 2 Poems About Baseball and has contributed articles to over 18 SABR published baseball books. His reporting has appeared in publications ranging from the New York Daily News to the West Orange Times Observer. So please welcome Peter.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And I actually am very excited to be part of the book about the 95 Braves. I wrote the Fred McGriff bio in the book, one of our great players here from Central Florida. I'm actually coming to you from Central Florida and have been, in addition to a great baseball fan, a fan and a library card holder since I got here 25 years ago.
Awesome. So we're going to bring on the other 3 panelists in just a minute, and Peter's going to introduce them. We will be opening for viewer questions, so if you have any, please drop them in the comments when the time comes. But please note that if we select your question, your name or username will be shown on screen right here along with your question. So Peter, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I am humbled to be here and to be part of basically an all-star lineup of sabermetricians and authors. Jacob Pomrenke, with the Braves cap on there, is actually the Society of American Baseball Research's Director of Editorial Content, in charge of all of the content that SABR creates. And he's also chair of the Black Sox Scandal Research Committee and the editor of Scandal on the South Side, the 1919 White Sox. More importantly, Jacob grew up, well, as importantly, I guess I should say, Jacob grew up in Atlanta in the 90s and is a fan of the Braves dynasty and maybe the first 9-year-old pitcher who mastered the circle change thanks to being a fan of Tom Glavine. He wrote the Chipper Jones bio in our book. Tom Hufford is one of the 16 founding members of SABR. He was at the very first meeting in Cooperstown in 1971, and in addition to all of the work he's done for the organization, served 1 year as secretary and 9 years on the board of directors. He lived in Atlanta and was president of the Braves 400 Club in 91 and 92 when they started their amazing winning streak of 14 consecutive division championships. Actually, I think we can credit him for that, that happening. And he also, in 2017, received the Braves' Ivan Allen Jr. Mr. Baseball Award, which is presented to the person who has contributed significantly to the promotion of baseball in the Atlanta area. He's an architect and engineer by profession and consulted to the Braves team during their construction of Turner Field. He also co-edited the Braves book and wrote the article about Mark Wohlers. Sam Gadziak, did I get that okay, Sam?
That'll work, yeah.
Okay. He's been a trade journalist for 20 years, and his passion is writing about music and baseball. In 2018, he started the RIP Baseball site, ripbaseball.com, because it merged his passion for visiting graves and for baseball. I've actually been on that site, and it is amazing, the pictures and the stories he's been able to tell. He tells about baseball players. He's visited over 500 graves in more than 20 states, and has almost locked into cemeteries at least twice. He wrote the bios of Mike Sharperston and Dwight Smith. Everybody, welcome to this panel. I'm so looking forward to talking about the Braves with you. I'd like to start by asking Jacob to just give us a brief overview, because it has to be brief. We want to get to the team more, but tell us about SABR's content and publications. It's an amazing amount of content that SABR and SABR members produce.
That's right, Peter. So this book about the 1995 Braves is part of the SABR Digital Library, which is our publications effort that we have that involves collaborative projects with 30 or 40 SABR members to put out books like this on themes like great memorable championship teams, or subjects like umpires or no hitters, or you name it. We've got over 75 books that are available through the digital library program, and all of them are free ebook downloads to SABR members. You can also get 50% off the paperback editions if you're a SABR member. So this is one of the cool treats of being part of SABR, is being able to contribute to a book like this.
And that's great. And where can we get all that stuff again?
It's all on our website, sabr.org. Any baseball fan can sign up for a SABR membership. We have monthly and annual memberships. So if you are interested in baseball, there is a place for you in SABR. It doesn't matter what your interest is, you'll probably find someone who shares that interest. So go to sabr.org to get the ebooks for free and all the other research resources that we have available.
Great, thank you. Tom, tell us how the book came together. How you decided to put this book together for the team, and how you got everybody involved.
Well, I didn't have a whole lot to do starting with. Scott Bush, who is our SABR executive director, came up with the idea, I understand, and brought it up at a board meeting last year. Bill Nowlin, who is editor of most of the books that SABR publishes, called me, probably a little over a year ago, in the spring of last year, saying, what do you think about doing this book? It's going to be the 25th anniversary of the Braves World Championship in '95. And I said, where do I sign up? And he said, well, you sign up close to the top. How would you like to be an editor? So I said, okay. That's fine. I was around. I knew most of the players. I thought, yeah, this would be a fun project to take on. And it was fun. It was interesting. It was challenging in a number of ways. We got it done. Our goal was to publish the book on opening day 2020. It turns out we were ready, but Major League Baseball wasn't. Numerous obstacles came up, and finally we decided, Bill and I talked and said, we could wait all summer and not have opening day. Maybe we better go ahead with it. So right around the 1st of May, we went ahead and the book was published.
Sure. And what was it like being...
Well,
oh, sorry, I was just asking, what was it like being around the Braves in those years in the early 90s and getting the 95 championship?
The very early 90s, meaning 1990 and the first part of 91, was kind of a continuation over from the 1980s. Things weren't very good. You looked and there was a lot of promise on the team, and everything clicked in 91, especially towards after 4th of July in 91, when the Braves went on to win National League championship and go on to the World Series that year. We didn't win the World Series that year, but for most people involved, it seemed like the Braves won just because it was the first trip to the World Series since the Braves moved here from Milwaukee, '66. The parade for that team after the World Series couldn't have been any larger if the Braves had won. Well, you go on to '92, and Braves finished first again, went to the World Series again lost. But you knew from looking at the team that this was a team that was going to be successful for quite a while. And it was. There was disappointment in '93 when the team lost to the playoffs to the Philadelphia Phillies, who went on to lose the series to Toronto, I think.
Mhm.
'94 was the year that we figured, okay, this will be the Braves' year. That was a strange summer. There was the threat of a strike hanging over for most of the year. The Braves weren't doing as well as they did the previous couple of years. And then on August, around the 11th or 12th, I forget, there was a strike or a work stoppage. And the Braves were in second place behind Montreal at that time. Everyone thought, this is going to be settled within a week or two. It wasn't. It went on, and the season was canceled, and the World Series was canceled, to everyone's disappointment. We don't have any idea what the Braves would have done the rest of the season. I like to think they would have still finished in first ahead of Montreal. But that left the winter, over the winter, wondering what was going to happen, because there was not between the players in Major League Baseball, between the players, in Major League Baseball, about a collective bargaining agreement, what was going to happen there. Before it was finally settled, the first part of the season was moved up to, I think the season opened about the 26th of April, something like that. But it was a shortened season then. It was 144 games instead of 162, which a lot of people don't remember. But everything worked out for the Braves in that one. It was, I think, the first year of the wild card, if I'm not mistaken, and the Braves beat Colorado. Jake, you can correct me on that. I'm not sure.
I think
then
you
the
are
Braves
correct.
beat Cincinnati Reds in the playoffs, and then on to the World Series. Beat Cleveland in 6 games. Finally, a World Series championship in Atlanta, the first major sports championship in the city of Atlanta. And everyone thought, here we go. From now on, it's going to be smooth sailing. Well, the Braves kept winning their division. Never got back to World Series championship again, though, which is a disappointment for many. But on the other hand, with the teams they had, if you were going out to a game some night or some weekend, you were pretty well guaranteed that the home team was going to win. so from that standpoint, it wasn't a disappointing time at all. Braves ended up winning 14 straight titles. If you don't know what would have happened in 1994, so that's not really counted in there. To think that anyone will ever do that again, I think it's almost impossible. I don't think it'll be done. And looking back, it was really, really fun to be part of that.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I think it's important to make that point, that the Braves record, even though 95 is their only world championship, is as good as anybody in the history of team sports. It's up there with the Celtics of the 50s and 60s, and the probably better than the Patriots recently. It is a record that I can't imagine anybody in baseball will ever match. But Sam, you've written lots and lots of bios. I mean, just looking through your website, I could see that. And of course, you wrote 2 in this book. Can you tell us a little bit how you got involved and why you picked the players you picked and what you learned about them?
Sure. Well, my memories of the Braves from that era, I grew up on the north side of Chicago. So what I remember about the Braves is that a couple times a year they would travel up to Wrigley Field and just stomp my poor Cubs into oblivion. So I don't really have a lot of good memories of this team as a Cubs fan. But I live down here in Atlanta, and I'm part of the Magnolia chapter of SABR. And so what happened here was that we received an email kind of announcing that this is a project that they wanted to do to focus on the 25th anniversary of this World Champions Braves team. And a lot of the bios of some of the top players, the stars, had already been written. And they presented us a list of all the bios that had yet to be done. And on that list, one was Dwight Smith, who was one of the ex-Cubs on the team. So I had to do an ex-Cub for that piece. And then the other one was Mike Sharperson, who I really didn't know much at all. The only 2 things that I knew about him was that he was an all-star for the Dodgers in a year where he really didn't even have a position to play. He was just kind of a reserve who happened to get picked to the all-star team. And he was killed in a car accident not long after the Braves won the World Series, actually. And so those 2 stories seemed really interesting to me. And so I signed up to do those. And I always really like writing about the role players on the team too. It seems like when you've got stars like Maddox and Glavine and Chipper Jones, that they're people much more, those stories are much more readily available. It's the stories of those spare outfielders, the pinch hitters, the last guy in the bullpen that don't really get told all that often. And I think those are the most fascinating ones. So I was happy to pick a couple of guys whose their contribution. Well, Dwight Smith was kind of the top pinch hitter on the team. So he did have a pretty good part to play in that championship team. Mike Sharperson, I believe, started the season with the Braves and was given just 7 at-bats as a pinch hitter. And he went back down to the minor leagues after that. So his role was much more limited. But like I said, I think that those are the really interesting stories. And fortunately, thanks to the internet and good baseball archives, you can always dig around and find pretty good information about these players, not only what their statistics were, because you can go on any statistic site and find how many hits they had, how many wins players had, but you don't really find out anything about the player as a person. And so I'm always interested in finding about the player as a person. Dwight Smith was one of my favorite guys with the Cubs, because not only was he a phenomenal hitter when he came up as a rookie, but he also had the best singing voice in the club. I was at a game where he sang the national anthem and was phenomenal. And so it was fun to write not only about the progress of his baseball career, but of his music career as well, and how the 2 stories just kind of followed each other that well. With Mike Sharperson, I didn't really know much about him, and just what a grind it was for him to get to the major leagues. He was part of a trade that was pretty notorious for the Dodgers, because they gave up a pitcher named Juan Guzman to the Blue Jays to get him. And Guzman turned into an all-star for a couple of seasons before injuries wrecked his career. And so the Dodgers see Guzman turning into an all-star and Sharperson as a bench player, and they figured that they got ripped off. And he turned himself into an all-star just by grit, basically. He didn't have a position to play of his own. He played all over the infield. I think he played a little bit of outfield too, but wherever he played, he hit. When he was brought in to pinch hit, he hit. He just did whatever it was that needed to be done. And that was what made him an all-star. He's one of the few people, I think, to be an all-star, despite the fact that he didn't have enough at-bats to even qualify for the batting title at the time. So it was two really neat stories that I enjoyed kind of unearthing and bringing back to light.
Yeah, I know. It was great to read those bios, to read everybody's bios and learn about the people who play as much as about their stats. And speaking of people, Jacob, I'm really interested in your perspective as being a boy there with your very first team, winning all the time. What was that like for you in 1995 when the Braves went ahead and won the World Series?
Well, I was fortunate to move to Atlanta right before 1991, so I maybe I can take a little bit of credit for the winning streak over 14 years. But you know, I got to kind of grow up watching all of these great players, and it seemed like every Braves team had a new set of great players. You know, of course, the pitching staff of Glavine, Maddox, and Smoltz stuck around for a long time together, but every year it seemed like they were bringing up new players, you know, Chipper Jones and Javi Lopez and Ryan Klesko and Andrew Jones and Jermaine Dye and you name it. They had every single year. It felt like they had, you know, a new batch of talent that they had either drafted or traded for or acquired in some way that was going to help, you know, keep this streak going. So it was a lot of fun. As Tom alluded to earlier, you know, there's so many great memories, you know, growing up and living in Atlanta during this time. You know, even though there was only the one championship season where they, you know, won the final game of the year, there were so many great memories throughout those springs and summers and most of the falls too. They went to 5 World Series in the 1990s. And so there were just so many great memories that this team brought to its fans. And it was just a wonderful experience that, you know, as Tom said, you can go to the ballpark just about every night and, you know, be assured that the home team was, if not going to win, at least be competitive, depending on, you know, who they had on the mound. And they always brought, you know, star players. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, when I moved to Central Florida in 1995, we had a lot of Braves fans here because we didn't have any teams of our own, really. And I started following that team. They were amazing. So I'm going to ask each of you to think about this, and just whoever wants to respond first, go ahead. But what do you think the key was? They had tons of great players for those 14 years, 4 Hall of Famers on the 95 team. But the only people who were there the whole time were Bobby Cox, the manager, and John Schuerholz, the general manager. Do you think it was them, the two of them, that were the key? I mean, aside from the 2 guys on the panel who were there all the time as fans, obviously was the big key. What do you think it was that kept them winning every year?
I'll jump in and say I do think. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tom.
I think that's exactly what it was Bobby Cox and John Schuerholz. And I got to know John very well, Bobby not as well, but I do know. And just talking with John, we sat down last fall and just talked for several hours about the 95 team and various other things. And I would bring up a name and he would recall some specific incident. Brought up was Mike Devereaux, who was an outfielder that they acquired from the White Sox. I think it was in August that year. And this surprised me, but John said, that's the best deal I make all year, adding Devereaux to this team. And he ended up being most valuable player of, I think it was the National League Championship Series. And then he was gone the next year. But John always had a way of finding the right player to fill in whenever someone needed to be replaced or there was an injury. He had a knack for that, and he and Bobby worked very well together in basically putting kind of a template of what kind of team we wanted to have and who would fit on the team and who wouldn't. And there were a number of players over the years that some all-star quality players who were acquired by the team and for one reason or another just didn't fit in and didn't last very long here. But I think the team of John and Bobby is what made this team.
Yeah. I mean, Jacob, you were going to say something about that too?
Yeah, no, yeah, I definitely agree with Tom. I think the stability that, you know, the manager and the general manager brought to the organization made a huge difference because, of course, the Braves in the 1980s were terrible, and you know, they shuffled through a lot of players and a lot of managers. You know, the famous quote from Ted Turner when he fired Bobby Cox the first time is, you know, if I was looking for the ideal manager, it would be Bobby Cox, the guy I just fired. You know, so Cox and Sherholtz brought this stability to the team, and it didn't matter who they brought in from a talent standpoint or a personality standpoint. All of those players ended up buying into the Braves system, and whether it was pitchers or hitters, they all came together. And you know, you had a lot of pretty strong personalities on the 95 Braves team, but throughout the 14-year run, you had players who were, you know, known to be a little disruptive in the clubhouse. And, you know, earlier you had Deion Sanders on the Braves, and much later on you had players like Gary Sheffield and J.D. Drew. And almost all of them, to a man, were model citizens in Atlanta. And they had their most productive years on the field in Atlanta, too. And I think that speaks very highly of Bobby Cox and John Sherholtz and all the players, the veteran players who kind of police the clubhouse too, you know, to keep this going. And it doesn't matter what you did before, it doesn't matter what you do after, but while you're here in Atlanta, you know, you're going to produce and you're going to be part of this team. And it, you know, it worked for as long as any team in Major League history and being successful.
Certainly did. And Sam, also, I was a Mets fan too for part of those years. So did you ever look at those Braves teams and figure out why can't the Cubs do this? Ever say that to yourself?
Yeah, you had to admire as much as it was easy to hate the Braves because they were just such a juggernaut. You couldn't help but admire them. You can buy a World Series team. The Marlins did it a couple times. The Yankees have had some luck with it. You can't buy a dynasty like that. You have to build it up. You can supplement what you have. You can supplement with good players off the free agent market or off of trades. But if you don't have a solid base and keep bringing up minor leaguers, you're just not going to get there. You know, they made a great deal. They got, you know, as a Cubs fan, we can take credit for giving them Greg Maddux. And I have yet to forgive Larry Himes, who was the general manager of the Cubs at that time. He decided it was eminently better to sign guys like Danny Jackson and Candy Maldonado than pay up for Greg Maddux. And that was something that killed us, but it helped them. But that was a great free agent signing. But then they had Glavine. They got Smoltz in a phenomenal trade, and then they kept bringing up, you know, rookie of the year contenders year after year after year. It was like whenever they had a weakness, they just plugged it in the very next year, and it became a strength. So they were just too tough to beat.
Yeah, I looked up the stats, of course, in 1995. Greg Maddux was 19-2. The only reason he didn't win 20 was because it was, as Tom pointed out, 144 game season. I think his WAR was like 9.6 or something for the just amazing. And yeah, I feel your pain on bad trades. I just want to point out one other thing for the audience. John Sherholtz also wrote the foreword for our book. And if you're out there and you want to ask us a question, please put it in the comments section. I'm going to ask more questions, but if your question shows up there, we'll be happy to try and get to it. Another thing I wanted to ask everybody is that the 95 team had 4 Hall of Famers on it. Well, in addition to John Sherholtz and Bobby Cox, they had Tom Glavine, they had Chipper Jones, Greg Maddux, John Smoltz. Are there players on that team who maybe should be in the Hall of Fame but aren't? I mean, I think McGriff should be in the Hall of Fame. But who else deserves the credit among the players for being the keys and maybe had the career that just has been not as awarded as it should be? Anybody want to say that?
McGriff was the first guy I was thinking of, and I think what ultimately has hurt him is he was a phenomenal home run hitter at a time when home runs have been kind of devalued based on things that were happening in the game as far as PED usage and all. I don't think that there's ever been anything that's connected McGriff to anything negative, but it just seems like if you hit a lot of home runs, you've been painted with that brush unfairly or not. And I think that's been something that's kept him out.
Yeah, when we reconvene next year for the 25th anniversary of the '96 Braves, we can talk about Andruw Jones, who's kind of I'm very much on the bandwagon to get him in the Hall of Fame. He was the best center fielder I've ever seen play in my lifetime. But from the '95 team, Fred McGriff, absolutely. I think when you look at his numbers in the era that he was in, those numbers are extraordinary. And yeah, he didn't have the eye-popping numbers of perhaps some of the PED associated sluggers, but he was extremely reliable. He was a great player, and a perfect presence for that team. And I really believe that he was one of the players that made the biggest difference in getting the Braves over the hump. After losing the World Series in '91 and '92 without him. He came up and was just, a reliable cleanup hitter, presence in that lineup. And, he hit some big home runs in the World Series in '95. So, you look at his overall body of work, I would certainly say he's, deserves some serious consideration.
Tom, anybody else you would put on that list?
Yeah. I think the definite one is Fred McGriff. Andruw Jones came up the next year. I think he's deserving. I think another one that was on his way was Steve Avery, who came up in '90 and had, a rough rookie season like most guys do. But up through '94, I think Steve was on his way and would have been the fourth member of that staff, at least to have had an extraordinary career, if not a Hall of Fame career, but a series of injuries did him in. Steve is also one of the articles that I wrote for the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing about those Braves teams, it's really good to know that you can count on your starting rotation being some of the greatest pitchers of all time. Good place to start. While we're talking about this, and Sam made me think about this too, do you have someone on the team that maybe wasn't one of the big stars that you really like or you feel was underappreciated? I have a personal favorite on this team, but I'll hold off. I'd like to see if there's somebody you folks would want to mention.
I always like when I was, back when he was with the Expos more, I always was a fan of Marquise Grissom. The Expos had such a great team with him and Delino DeShields at the top of the lineup. And so when Grissom came over, it seemed like he kind of, at least for a few seasons, kept right on hitting and kept up with that talent. And that was what the Braves were just loaded with. They had all these guys that, if you look at their careers, you wouldn't really think of Grissom as a Hall of Famer, but he had great seasons right when they needed him to have them. And you can a lot of very good players all working together at once can turn into a pretty undefeatable team.
I would say he was probably a bigger star at the time than he may be considered today, but I would say David Justice certainly, played a much larger role than a lot of people remember, 25 years later. But in 1995, he was one of the biggest stars on the team. And of course, Game 6, he was the subject of all that controversy because of the comments he made before the game about the Atlanta fans not being as enthusiastic as the fans in Cleveland were. Of course, they had a 40-year drought, between World Series appearances. So they were very, very enthusiastic in Cleveland, kind of like the Braves fans were in 1991 and 92. But of course, Justice walked the walk after talking the talk and hit that big home run in Game 6 to win it all. But for me, I think he was one of the the biggest presences on that 95 team and really throughout the 90s and until the trade with Cleveland that sent him away. I would consider him one of the biggest parts of the entire Braves story of those dynasty years.
Yeah, Tom, is there anybody that you feel was underappreciated?
Yeah.
Other than Steve Avery, yeah.
For a couple of years there, Mark Wohlers was exactly what the Braves needed out of the bullpen. In the 95 season, he was their top reliever, was on the mound, close out the World Series game. Then, like Steve, ran into several other problems. I've always liked Mark. I've liked what he contributed to the team, his attitude, during the problems that he had. I can't think of any other pitcher that the team put on the disabled list and listed inability to pitch, but that's what happened to Mark. There are so many other players, say during the decade of the 90s. Javi Lopez is another one that is kind of overlooked, but was certainly an all-star catcher during his tenure with the Braves.
Yeah, and of course the Charlie O'Brien, who's the backup catcher, is actually it has a really interesting footnote in baseball history because he was the first catcher to use the hockey mask, and that they all use now. He made it. I do have to share with you my favorite unknown player or lesser known player on the Braves is Brad Klontz, who was turned out to be the setup man, and it's all personal because in 1993 he was at a card show in Orlando. I took my kids to, and it was a really low rent card show because it was a minor league player at the time. But someone said you should get his autograph on a baseball because he's going to be in the majors in a year or two. And I still have my Brad Klontz autographed baseball. I was just very pleased about that. And if he's listening, I want him to know I still have it up there with all of my autographed baseballs. We have one of the people who was listening in said that they liked Steve Bedrosian. Also another one that someone on the panel might know who that is. If you can see her list, but he was another one that is a very good player for many, many years. One thing about that World Series against the Braves against Cleveland, I think Cleveland was the favorite, weren't they? And they had won the most games, and they had the absolute best offense. Was it in your mind, did you feel it was an upset when the Braves won the World Series?
I don't know that I would consider it an upset, but I do think the pressure was much more on the Braves side of things than for Cleveland. Cleveland again had a 41-year postseason drought, between their World Series appearances, so they were kind of, I wouldn't say happy to be there because they had a very talented team, but the Braves had been to the World Series twice already in the 90s. And I do think the pressure was all on Atlanta. And I think that was something that the Braves players talked about at the time, was when do we get over the hump? When do we finally win it all? And, that was part of the controversy before Game 6 with David Justice's comments was, the fans were starting to get a little bit tired of National League championships and, wanted to win it all and get the big trophy. But, so I do think it wasn't an upset so much. It was almost a sigh of relief on the Braves side of things that they, finally got over that hump and won the championship.
One of the other things that struck me from reading all the bios, reading everything in the book, and also some of the other research I did, was the team itself in 95 was very tight. There was a lot of support. I think at one point Greg Maddux said that because he lost Game 5 of the World Series and going into the 6th, he said, I was really glad that Tom Glavine had the opportunity to win it because he had been there when the Braves were not doing that well. Can you talk, maybe, Tom, a little bit about the spirit on the team, the way that the players supported each other? Was that something that you folks all, and everybody, you know, did you find the same thing in your research on the players?
I don't remember that specifically, but looking back, I can see where that would happen. We talked earlier about how Schuerholz and Bobby Cox were together. That was almost like a family. Of the players on the roster here, none of the 40 made their major league debut with the Braves that year. That all come up through the minors together and had that as a shared experience. The others, you know, they just seemed to mesh like a family. And I think they were supportive of each other, obviously. I don't know, I might think something else for a minute right now.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of, I would agree, there was a lot of support for each other on the team.
Well, it does seem like, you know, in some areas, if you're, you know, not necessarily a superstar, but just like one of those good or very good players, that sometimes you're willing to take a secondary role if it means getting that World Series ring, which is such an elusive thing to have, that a lot of players, I think, are willing to kind of, you know, step aside or accept the role that they're given in order to get the team, get that ring, get the team that championship. And that's, if you have a really good clubhouse and a good atmosphere in the clubhouse, like Jake was saying, you know, people who are maybe necessarily, you know, sometimes selfish or maybe not the best team players are willing to, step up and be part of a team and just win as a team rather than just, you know, have individual glory.
And to follow up on what you said, Peter, about the Game 5 loss with Maddux and going into Game 6, I do think that Tom Glavine was the perfect pitcher to be on the mound because he was one of the longest tenured, along with Jeff Blauser, the shortstop, on the Braves team in 1995. And, you know, he was also the face of the Players Union in the strike and the lockout in 1994 and you know, to open the season in 95. Glavine received a lot of boos from Braves fans throughout the year in 95. And it took a while before he could win them back over. And so, you know, there was a lot of that kind of drama going on behind the scenes with Tom Glavine because, you know, he had also been all these 100 loss teams throughout the 1980s when he came up from the minor leagues and then, you know, was part of the big run winning the Cy Young in 1991. And, you know, so he had been there. He had been through all the tough times. And, you know, to be on the mound for Game 6, I think that was something that, you know, all the Braves kind of rallied around him. He was one of the, you know, big leaders in the clubhouse on and off the field. And so I think for him to be out there on the mound and to close it out and to clinch that first championship in the city's history, I think was very, very meaningful for everybody in that clubhouse.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. And as Tom pointed out, the first world major sports championship that any team in Atlanta had ever won. So also just an amazing thing for the city. Not getting questions, but as I promised you all, I have more questions.
Wow.
So the Braves were owned by Ted Turner, certainly one of the more flamboyant figures in American history, the man who created CNN, the man who first put satellite television on, basically made the Braves America's team because they were on TBS. And during the 1980s, his management of the team didn't seem to be working out. He had always seemed to be hiring the wrong players or signing the wrong free agents. Is there something that turned it around in the 90s when he finally hired John Schuerholz and they got Bobby Cox back? Or was Turner less involved in the team? Tom, you may know that again, being more of an insider at the time.
I'm not sure that Ted took less of an interest or less of a role with the team, but I think Jacob mentioned earlier, I think Jacob did, that when Bobby Cox was here in the early 80s and was fired, at the press conference they had to announce his firing, someone asked Ted, "What are you going to be looking for in your next manager?" And he said, "Well, I'd like someone like Bobby Cox if I hadn't just fired him." Well, Bobby went to Toronto and was manager there for several years. And then he came back to Atlanta as general manager. And I think that was probably the catalyst that Bobby took over as GM and was given free rein on putting the front office together. And up front, Bobby said, we're gonna build this team around pitching. And so I think Bobby as GM 86, and then had laid the foundation for that team. If you go back and look at the Braves minor league teams in the late 90s, in the late 80s, that nucleus was there. When John Schuerholz, at the end of the 1990 season, he says, two big reasons I took the job. One was the opportunity to work with Bobby Cox as manager. He said, if I'd ever had the opportunity in Kansas City, I would have loved to have Bobby there. And then he also looked at the minor league system that the Braves had put together. And he said, a lot of people thought I was crazy for leaving Kansas City, Atlanta, but when I looked at the nucleus of the team I saw that was going to be coming along, also the chance to work with Bobby, and I think Ted basically went to Bobby and offered him the job back as GM. Bobby took it with the thought that, gee, I'd love to put a team together and then be able to manage it, and that's what happened. Ted kind of stepped back a little bit. He was still there in the stands, rooting on, and he was there in the rah-rah also. But he kind of turned it over and let John and Bobby run the team. That was the difference.
Well, it showed Ted Turner's great management that he was able to finally step back and let John and Bobby run the team. We're getting some questions, and two of them anticipated my next question for you folks, so I want to go ahead and ask them. Christy asks, for any of the panelists, which of any of the coaches had the biggest impact on winning the title? And Bill actually brought up Leo Mazzone, the pitching coach, as being somebody that maybe deserves some credit. So would anybody like to talk about Leo or any of the coaches being particularly impactful?
Well, I'd say Leo is one of the most fascinating characters on the entire 1995 Braves team. I think the way that he ran his pitching staff, and Bobby Cox pretty much left him alone to do whatever he wanted, and he had some quirky ideas that he had inherited from some great pitching coaches of the past, like Johnny Sain, the old Boston Braves pitcher. And so, Leo certainly had a great impact on the entire Braves dynasty, and also in 1995. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of players came in from other teams and had their greatest success while in Atlanta under Bobby Cox and Leo Mazzoni for the pitchers. And so it was very interesting to kind of watch that evolution with, pitchers that, may have had some success with other organizations, but then they came to Atlanta and, for whatever reason, they just, pitched lights out. And I think that was something that, you have to credit people like Leo Mazzoni and his system, which was very different than most other organizations were running, with throwing a couple times on their off days, and their running schedules, their throwing schedules were very different than most teams have their pitchers doing. And so I think that was very much something that the Braves tried that very few other teams have tried before or since. And I've always wondered, why other teams didn't try Leo Mazzoni's system, because it sure seemed to work for a long, long time in Atlanta.
I mean, it's easy to look like a great pitching coach when you've got the four aces that the Braves did. But yeah, like Jake was saying, you look at their bullpen, and there's some good players, but nobody, I don't know that you would really say was one of the best relievers of that era. Wohlers had a couple of really great seasons, but then he kind of lost his way after that. But just they for whatever reason, when they came to Atlanta, they turned into stars and stoppers.
The other coach I would point out would be Jim Beecham, who was the bench coach. Jim had been kind of a fourth outfielder, if you would, on all the major league teams he was with. Cardinals, Mets, Houston. And he and Bobby got together, I think it was either the 65 or 66 Richmond Braves on that team, and they didn't know each other, but Bobby says he found out Jim was from Oklahoma, and that's where Bobby was born, and they became fast friends in Richmond. And after that, Bobby wanted Jim to be around, and Jim became kind of like a father figure on that team. By the time he got here, he had managed Braves minor league system for several years, so again, he knew a lot of the young kids coming up too. He had a big impact on the team.
Yeah. Also, I would say one thing about Bobby Cox as a manager, one of the many great things about him, was he was secure enough to get the brightest people. He would always have guys who had been major league managers on his staff, guys who were going to be major league managers on his staff. He never felt threatened. He got the best people and took their advice when he needed it. We have another question, which I think is really good. It's from Brian, and it's, were there any other notable games or moments you remember that didn't make it into the book for whatever reason? Anything you left out or had to leave out? It's always a great question if anybody wants to take a swing at that one. And of course, Tom, as the editor, would know that more. But anything from your bios? I just know from my bio of Fred McGriff, I had to leave out some stuff that I really would have liked to put in. But yeah, go ahead.
I'm trying to think. There's some things in that I was surprised that made it in. There were a couple that I was surprised because I didn't know some of this information. If biography about his family background just amazed me. I had no idea he had been through that, but his family went through the Holocaust. They were all killed except for Stan's dad, who was a man that was used because of his strength. They kind of pulled him aside and made him work on the other side. The other biography that I knew this person, knowing Ernie Johnson Jr., but I had no idea about what he and his wife had done with regard to adopting children, especially special needs children. And I don't know, somebody that's been 6 or 7, something like that. There are some. I can't think of anything that we cut. We thought maybe we shouldn't go there, but
It's certainly a very comprehensive.
Brad Clump.
Jacob, was there anything you wanted to say about anybody that didn't get in there, or?
I think one aspect of the 1995 Braves that we haven't talked about much today, but I think was, kind of ever present for anyone following that team, were the legendary broadcasters. Skip Carey, Pete Van Wieren, Don Sutton, and Joe Simpson, were the 4 mainstays in the broadcast booth for many, many years. And, Sam knows, being a Cubs fan, there are a lot of people out there in the 80s and 90s that grew up watching the Cubs and the Braves on WGN and TBS. And, it was the voices of the broadcasters that they heard most. The players came and went every year, but the broadcasters generally stuck around. And that was kind of the, Skip and Pete were the voices of the team for many, many years. And, we included some biographies of each of those 4 broadcasters in this book, but I'm not sure that it's possible to really convey just how big a part of the team and the culture of the Braves that they were during the 1990s. And, this is how most people followed the team. And it didn't matter if you were in Atlanta, a mile away from Fulton County Stadium, or if you were in, Wyoming, following TBS every day. These were the voices you heard bringing Braves baseball over the television or the radio. And I think that's something that is very difficult to convey in a book, is just how much the broadcasters' voices were part of that team and bringing, the Braves to really, all 4 corners of the United States, and, making a lot of people Braves fans during that era. Obviously, the winning baseball helped as well, but, it was the camaraderie that they had in the broadcast booth, and just that unique style that all 4 of those broadcasters brought that really made a lot of people Braves fans for a long time.
Yeah, it's a very good point. It's always the voices you hear that you remember. Sam, anything that you would have liked to add or in the book, or?
I got kind of lucky in that the 2 guys that I wrote about, their careers were maybe about 10 years or so long. So I can't imagine trying to condense someone's career like Chipper Jones into 3,000 words or whatever, because there's just so much there. So I was able to be pretty comprehensive in what I was able to write with the Smith and Sharperson.
Yeah, it really is, for those of you who are interested in the Braves or just in baseball. It is a just very comprehensive look at the team. We're getting close to 8 o'clock, and I know we're going to go a couple of minutes past that, but I do want to start wrapping it up. But before we do that, I just want to ask each of you, what's your next project coming up? Sam, are you going to be writing more? Going to be writing more about players' bios or visits for RIP Baseball?
Yeah. Well, if I can give a quick plug, ripbaseball.com. I write about obituaries for any recently deceased ball player. And then I also write grave stories about ball players from the past that whose grave sites I've visited. So currently, I'm actually going to be hopefully finishing John McNamara's obituary this evening. He's the manager of the 86 Red Sox, is probably what he's best known for. But he managed for, I think, 14 or 15 years in the majors for 5 or 6 teams. Seems like there's an awful lot there. So I'd like to get a little bit more beyond just what his managerial record is, or talk about the decisions he made in the ninth inning of Game 6 of the '86 World Series. And then I'm writing some stories about some folks that I visited at a couple of cemeteries in Cincinnati. So if you're into 19th century baseball, I've got a whole lot of that coming up, because some of the Cincinnati Red Stockings, of course, were the baseball's first professional team, and there are a lot of players of that era who are in a couple of the cemeteries in Cincinnati. So it's fun digging back into 100-plus-year-old newspaper archives.
Yeah, I just read your bio of Fred Waterman, actually, third baseman on the Red Stockings. Really nice job. You don't see a lot of bios of him, and I was very pleased to get a chance to read it.
Thank you.
Tom, do you have another project coming up?
Not specifically, but there's one that's been hanging around at the Magnolia chapter of SABR in Atlanta. We started a few years ago on to do a book on the 50th anniversary of the first Braves team, 66, with hopes of publishing that in 2016. Well, we missed that for a number of reasons. There's still some biographies to be going. I don't think we're too far away from that. It would be nice to finish that one up, even though it wouldn't necessarily be on the 55th or 60th anniversary. Some of those guys are getting old like the rest of us, so that's one I like to finish up.
That's great. It sounds like a great project. That was a very interesting team, actually. Some great hitting on that team. And Jacob, what's next for you? Or I know you've got a lot. I'm sure we have a lot of projects at SABR.
Well, we just unveiled a brand new redesign of the SABR.org website this summer. So that's been number one on my priority list. And we've got a lot of new projects in the works, including celebrating SABR's 50th anniversary. We've got a new anthology book coming out in September from University of Nebraska Press. And we will be unveiling some 50 at 50 projects to celebrate SABR's 50th anniversary in 2021. So that will be the big thing for us coming up.
Keep talking. So I'm back.
So, and then of course my personal research interest is with the Black Sox scandal in 1919, and we have a number of 100th anniversary projects coming up later this year to kind of commemorate the darkest hour in baseball history with the Black Sox scandal. And the Say It Ain't So Joe grand jury hearing is coming up in September. So that'll be something that our Black Sox committee will be commemorating later this year.
Oh, that's great. And I should just say, for those of you out there who are interested in joining SABR, go to SABR.org. There's information about how to become a member. If you're interested in our book, you can buy it on the SABR.org shop, along with lots of other cool books and things that SABR has put out. So I also now want to just thank the panel so much for joining us here and for giving me the opportunity to see you all in person and hear from you. It's just been wonderful for me. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all, I hope in person sometime, but if not, at least maybe working with you on another project. So Sarah, I guess we're winding down now.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. I dropped the survey link in the comments, so if you enjoyed the program and you want to tell us, please fill that out. And thank all of you, the four of you, for coming tonight and talking about the 1995 Atlanta Braves team. If you want to hang out for just a minute backstage while I finish everything up, and I'll talk to you in a minute, okay?
Okay, great.
All right.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks for
having us.
watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to find out when we have new fun and informative videos for you. Orange County Library System is your place to learn, grow, connect.